Hey everyone! Have you ever felt the gut-wrenching sting of betrayal from someone you trusted? Whether it's a friend, a partner, or even a family member, it's a feeling that cuts deep, doesn't it? You put your heart on the line, only to realize that the person you believed in wasn't who they seemed to be. It's one of the most confusing and painful experiences anyone can go through. Today, I'm going to share a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and trust. And believe me, it's not just any story of betrayal. It's one that comes from someone close, someone who should have been the last person to break that trust. So grab your favorite snack, settle in, and get ready, because after hearing this, you might just find yourself reflecting on your own relationships and how much trust really matters. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alex, and I usually share stories about life. Some fun, some tough, but always real. Today, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone to share something very personal. It's a story about family, love, and betrayal. And to be honest, it's not an easy story to tell, because the hurt is still fresh. But sometimes, talking about painful experiences is part of the healing process, and maybe sharing this story will help others who've been through something similar. Let me give you a little background. I've been married to my husband, Ethan, for 20 years. Our marriage, like any, has seen ups and downs, but we've always managed to come through stronger. My husband is my rock, my best friend, my partner in everything. I trust him completely, and we've worked hard to build a life and a relationship that we can both be proud of. Trust is the foundation of everything we built together, and I thought it was unbreakable. But my husband isn't the only important person in this story. There's also my brother-in-law, Chris. When I married my husband, I felt like I gained more than just a partner. I gained a family. And my brother-in-law wasn't just my husband's brother to me. He became my friend. Over the years, we formed a bond that went beyond what I expected from an in-law relationship. We'd hang out together, watch movies, have dinner, and just talk about life. It felt good, having that kind of relationship with him. I trusted him, and I thought he genuinely cared about me and my husband. What I didn't realize at the time was just how fragile trust can be. Trust isn't something you can take for granted, even when it comes to family. Looking back now, I wonder if there were red flags that I just didn't see or didn't want to see. Maybe there were moments that should have made me stop and question what was going on. But at the time, I didn't question anything. I believe in the bond we had, and I never thought it could be broken. You see, when we think of betrayal, we often think of it in the context of friendships or romantic relationships. But family betrayal, that's something else entirely. It cuts deeper, because family is supposed to be your safe space, the people you can trust without question. So when someone in your family betrays you, it feels like they've broken an unspoken rule of loyalty, something sacred. That's why the pain is so intense when family trust is shattered. At that point, I had no reason to doubt my brother-in-law. We had a close relationship, filled with shared jokes, celebrations, and support through difficult times. I saw him as an extension of my husband, someone who had our best interests at heart. So when things started to feel off, it took me by surprise. It wasn't something I noticed all at once. The change was gradual, so subtle that I didn't even realize it was happening at first. Looking back now, I could see the little moments that should have been warning signs. A strange look here, an odd comment there, small things that didn't make sense at the time. But they were all pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was too late. The damage had been done, and I was left to pick up the pieces. My husband had to go out of town for work, a routine trip that we'd been through many times before. I supported him, of course, as any spouse would, but I missed him. And that's when I thought, why not hang out with my brother-in-law? It'll be fun, just like old times. Little did I know that decision would lead to a chain of events that would change everything I thought I knew about family and trust. So let's set the scene. My husband had left for his business trip, which wasn't unusual at all. He's had to travel for work many times over the years, and I've always handled it just fine. We talk every day, send texts throughout the day, and FaceTime at night to catch up. It had become part of our routine. But this time, I found myself feeling more lonely than usual. I'm not sure why, but something about this trip made the house feel quieter and emptier. Maybe it was just one of those weeks where everything felt a little off. Anyway, that's when I thought of my brother-in-law, Chris. We'd hung out before when my husband was away, just to keep each other company. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I figure it would be nice to have some company. Watch a movie. Maybe go out to dinner. It felt like a good way to pass the time until my husband returned. So I reached out to him, and he was more than happy to come over. At first, everything was perfectly normal. We talked, laughed, and even joked about how my husband always leaves me alone with the TV remote when he's away. It was comforting, having him around. I felt less lonely, and for a while, it seemed like things were going well. But as the days passed, I started noticing subtle changes. It wasn't anything huge, just small things that felt a little off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something was different. For one, he started texting more than usual when we were together. He'd be looking down at his phone, scrolling or typing away, even in the middle of our conversations. I tried not to think much of it. After all, everyone's on their phone all the time these days, right? But it wasn't just that. He seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. Whenever I'd ask him about it, he'd brush it off, saying he was just tired or stressed from work. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But deep down, there was this nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Then, one evening, I invited him over for dinner. I thought maybe a nice, relaxing meal would lift both of our spirits. I went all out, cooking one of our favorite dishes. I was excited for the evening, hoping it would feel like old times, when everything was easy and uncomplicated. But the entire night, I could feel this underlying tension that I couldn't shake. He was there, but at the same time, he wasn't. His attention kept drifting back to his phone, and every time I tried to engage him in conversation, it felt like he was only half listening. At one point, I remember asking him about work, just to make small talk. He answered, but his response was vague, like he didn't really want to talk about it. I figured maybe he was just having an off day. We all have those, right? But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the feeling grew that something was seriously wrong. I tried to push those thoughts out of my mind. After all, this was my brother-in-law. We'd been through so much together, and he was practically family. There was no reason for me to doubt him. And yet the signs kept piling up. Every time I glanced at him during dinner, he seemed distant, preoccupied. He wasn't his usual self, and the atmosphere felt off. After dinner, we moved to the living room to watch a movie. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. The movie played, but I barely paid attention. My mind was racing, trying to figure out why he was acting so strange. Was it me? Was something going on in his personal life that he wasn't telling me about? The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. That's when things really started to unravel. As we sat on the couch, I noticed him checking his phone again. At first, I tried to brush it off like I had before, but this time, I couldn't help myself. My curiosity got the better of me. I didn't want to be nosy, but there was something about the way he was acting that made me feel like I had to know what was going on. I'll never forget that moment. It felt like everything slowed down as I glanced over at his phone screen. It was a message from my husband. At first, I thought nothing of it. They're brothers, after all, and they text all the time. But then, I saw the nature of the message. It wasn't just a casual text. It was flirty, playful in a way that sent the chill down my spine. My stomach dropped, and my mind immediately went into overdrive. Was I reading too much into this? Maybe it was just a joke between brothers, something innocent that I was blowing out of proportion. But as I watched the exchange continue, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I felt my face flush with heat, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure whether to confront him right then and there or wait and talk to my husband first. But before I could even process what I was seeing, Chris looked up and caught me staring at his phone. The look on his face said it all. He knew I'd seen something, and suddenly, the room was filled with an unbearable tension. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice shaky. He looked at me for a moment, his expression unreadable, before giving a quick nod. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, but his voice sounded off. It was as if he was trying to convince himself more than me. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Was there something going on between my husband and his brother that I didn't know about? My gut was telling me one thing, but my heart refused to believe it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was right there in front of me, staring me in the face. I tried to get through the rest of the evening as normally as possible, but it was like walking through a fog. I couldn't focus on the movie, on the conversation, on anything. All I could think about was what I had seen, and what it meant. My brother-in-law was still there, sitting next to me, but it felt like there was a giant wall between us now. one that I wasn't sure we could ever break down. By the time he left that night, I was a mess. My mind was racing with questions, doubts, and fears. I wanted to call my husband right then and there, but something held me back. I needed time to process what I had just seen, to figure out what it meant. I couldn't just throw accusations around without knowing the full story. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same after that night. The moment after my brother-in-law left, I was in complete turmoil. My hands were shaking, and I could barely breathe. I had to sit down, trying to calm myself, but it was like my mind was spinning in every direction. There was no escaping the reality of what I had seen on his phone, the flirtatious messages between him and my husband. Every word I read felt like a punch to my gut. How could this be happening? Was I imagining things? Maybe I was overreacting. Or maybe this was exactly what it looked like. I couldn't sit with this any longer. I had to do something. I had to know the truth. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called my husband. My heart was racing, and I could feel the adrenaline pulsing through me. Every ring felt like an eternity, and when he finally answered, his voice was calm, as if nothing was wrong. That calmness only made me more anxious. I didn't know how to bring it up, how to start the conversation. Should I ask casually? Should I dive right into it? "Hey," I started, my voice shaky and unsure. "How's your trip going?" He answered in his usual way, telling me about his meetings and how things were going at work. But I could barely focus on what he was saying. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: anger, fear, confusion. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice more firm this time. "I saw something tonight, and I need you to explain it to me." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him shift, like he wasn't sure what was coming, but knew it wasn't good. "What did you see?" he asked, his tone suddenly more serious. "I saw messages between you and Chris." I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Flirty messages. What's going on between you two?" For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for his response. I imagined 1,000 different scenarios in my head. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was just a joke between brothers. Maybe. But deep down, I knew there was something more. The tension in the silence was unbearable. Finally, he spoke. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "We were just messing around. It didn't mean anything." My stomach dropped. His words didn't match the weight of what I had seen. Flirty messages didn't seem like just messing around to me. How could he say that? How could he try to downplay something that felt so significant, so hurtful? "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising with a mix of disbelief and anger. "I saw the way you were talking to him. This isn't some joke. This isn't something you can just brush off. I feel completely blindsided by this. How long has this been going on?" Again, there was silence. I could almost hear him struggling to find the right words, but whatever he said wouldn't make this better. I wanted answers, but I was also terrified of hearing the truth. The thought of my husband and his brother having some secret relationship behind my back was almost too much to bear. Finally, he spoke again, and this time his voice was filled with regret. "It was never supposed to get this far," he admitted quietly. "We've been close for a long time, but it's not what you think. We never crossed that line. I swear, it was just words." "Just words," I repeated, feeling a bitter sting in my chest. "Do you even hear yourself right now? You're married to me, and you're having this kind of conversation with your brother, of all people. How am I supposed to believe that it's just words?" The pain in my voice was clear, and I could tell he was struggling with how to respond. He kept apologizing, saying he never meant to hurt me, but the damage had already been done. I couldn't unsee those messages, and I couldn't undo the betrayal I felt. Even if they had never physically crossed a line, the emotional betrayal was enough to shatter the trust we had built over the years. "I don't know what to say," he finally confessed, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't erase the betrayal, couldn't take away the gut-wrenching pain I felt in that moment." I hung up the phone, unable to listen to any more apologies. I needed time to think, to process everything. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The man I had trusted with my heart, the man I had built my life with, had betrayed me in a way I never saw coming. And it wasn't just him. It was his brother, too. Two people I loved and trusted, two people who were supposed to be my family, had broken that trust in the most devastating way. I felt like my whole world had collapsed around me. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to move forward from this? The pain, the anger, the confusion. It was all too much to handle. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but I was frozen in place, numb from the shock of it all. The next few days were a blur. My husband kept trying to call, sending me messages apologizing, begging me to talk to him. But I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face him. I wasn't ready to deal with the fallout of everything that had happened. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Eventually, I knew I had to confront my brother-in-law too. I couldn't let him get away with this without answering for what he had done. But the thought of facing him, of hearing whatever excuse he would come up with, filled me with dread. I wasn't ready for that conversation, but I knew it had to happen. When I finally called him, my voice was cold and distant. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking I was emotional. I needed to be strong, to get the answers I deserved. "We need to talk," I said bluntly, "about what's been going on between you and my husband." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the guilt in his voice before he even spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his words almost a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen." I felt a surge of anger rise in me. "You never meant for this to happen. You've been flirting with your brother's wife, and you didn't mean for it to happen. Do you even realize what you've done?" I know," he said quickly. "I messed up, but please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you or him. It was stupid. I wasn't thinking." But his words didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and there was no going back. The trust was gone, and I wasn't sure if I could ever look at either of them the same way again. After that intense confrontation with my brother-in-law, I felt like a shell of myself. I was numb, trying to process everything that had just happened. The emotions swirled around me: anger, sadness, disbelief. The trust I had in two people closest to me had been completely shattered, and I wasn't sure how I could ever rebuild it. The days following the confrontation felt like I was living in a fog. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. All I could think about were those messages, the lies, the betrayal. I replayed the conversations over and over in my head, wondering how I didn't see this coming. How did I miss the signs? What kind of person could let this happen without realizing it? My husband continued to call, sending me texts asking if we could talk, pleading with me to understand that he was sorry. I wanted to respond, but every time I picked up my phone, I felt this wave of nausea. How could I talk to him when all I could think about was what he had done behind my back? How could I look at him the same way after knowing that he had flirted with his own brother while I was completely in the dark? Despite everything, I knew that I couldn't avoid him forever. Our relationship wasn't something I could just walk away from without at least trying to understand what had happened. So after days of silence, I agreed to meet with him. The thought of facing him filled me with dread, but I knew we had to have this conversation. We had to address the elephant in the room. When we finally met, the tension was palpable. He looked nervous, like he knew this conversation could change everything between us. I sat across from him, my arms crossed, trying to keep myself from breaking down. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to show him how much I was hurting. But inside, I was barely holding it together. So, I started, my voice cold and distant. "You got some explaining to do." He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I messed up. But I need you to understand that it wasn't what it looked like." I scoffed at that. "Not what it looked like." I saw the messages, Ethan. They weren't just friendly banter. You were flirting with your brother. How am I supposed to believe that this wasn't something more? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to explain it," he admitted. "It started out as a joke, but somewhere along the way, it got out of hand. We never meant for it to go that far." I stared at him, my heart aching. "You never meant for it to go that far? Do you even hear yourself? You were flirting with your own brother, and you expect me to believe it was just a joke?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I know it sounds crazy. I know I've hurt you. But I swear to you, we never crossed any physical boundaries. It was stupid, and I regret it more than you'll ever know." I wanted to believe him, but how could I? The betrayal wasn't just about the messages. It was about the trust that had been broken. Even if they hadn't crossed a line physically, the emotional betrayal was enough to tear me apart. It was like the foundation of our marriage had been ripped out from under me, and I didn't know how to rebuild it. What am I supposed to do with that? I asked, my voice cracking. How do we move forward from this? How am I supposed to trust you again after what you've done? He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The thought of him touching me made my skin crawl. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking. But I love you, and I want to fix this. I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I looked at him, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I whispered. You've broken something between us, and I don't know if it can be repaired. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to believe that we could work through this. But the pain was still so fresh, and the thought of him betraying me like that, especially with his own brother, was almost too much to bear. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke. I need time, I said quietly. I need time to process this, to figure out what I want. I can't just pretend everything is okay. He nodded, his eyes filled with sadness. I understand, he said softly. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting. I just hope that one day they'll be able to forgive me. With that, we parted ways. I walked out of that meeting feeling more confused than ever. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe that we could rebuild our relationship and move forward. But another part of me wasn't sure if I could ever trust him again. The wound was too deep, and I wasn't sure if time could heal it. As for my brother-in-law, I didn't want to see him again. The thought of facing him, of pretending that everything was normal, was unbearable. I knew we would have to have another conversation at some point. But I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to confront him about the role he had played in all of this. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to find a sense of normalcy. I threw myself into work, into keeping busy, anything to distract myself from the pain. But no matter how hard I tried, the betrayal was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I couldn't escape it. My husband continued to reach out, sending me messages, asking if we could talk. He was doing everything he could to show me that he was sorry, that he was willing to change, but I still couldn't bring myself to face him. I needed more time. Eventually, I knew I had to confront my brother-in-law again. I couldn't avoid him forever, especially since he was part of my extended family. So after weeks of avoiding the situation, I finally agreed to meet with him. When we met, the tension was overwhelming. I could barely look at him, the hurt still too raw. He looked guilty, like he knew exactly what he had done and the damage it had caused. I'm sorry, he said immediately, his voice filled with remorse. I know I messed up. I never should have let things go as far as they did. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. His apology didn't change what had happened, and it certainly didn't make me feel any better about the situation. You hurt me, I finally said, my voice trembling. You and your brother, you both betrayed me. How am I supposed to move forward from this? How am I supposed to ever trust either of you again? He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know, he admitted quietly. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything. I wish I could take it back. His words hung in the air, but they didn't bring me any comfort. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. The betrayal had changed everything. In the weeks and months that followed, life felt like a series of small, painful steps forward and even more painful steps backward. Healing after a betrayal like this wasn't a straight path. It was full of doubts, setbacks, and moments where I questioned everything. Could I ever forgive my husband? Could I ever trust him or my brother-in-law again? And most importantly, did I want to? One of the hardest parts of the healing process was learning to manage my emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion. They all blended together into a storm that seemed impossible to control. There were days when I felt like I could move on, like I could forgive and try to rebuild what had been broken. And then there were days when the mere thought of them, of their betrayal, made me feel sick to my stomach. It was a constant battle between my heart and my mind. My husband, to his credit, was doing everything he could to make amends. He gave me the space I needed, but he also made it clear that he wasn't going to give up on us. He would send flowers, leave heartfelt messages, and even write letters apologizing for what he had done and how much he regretted it. But despite all his efforts, the pain lingered. One night, after weeks of not seeing each other, we finally sat down to have a long, honest conversation. It wasn't just about the messages or the flirtation. It was about everything. About our marriage, our trust, and whether or not we could actually survive this. The conversation was raw, emotional, and full of difficult truths. I hate what I did, he told me, his voice breaking. I hate that I hurt you, and I hate that I put our marriage in jeopardy. But more than anything, I hate that I made you question whether or not you can trust me. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. If you need time, I'll give you time. If you need space, I'll give you space. But I can't lose you, and I can't lose us. I sat there, listening to his words, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I felt sad. Sad for what we had lost, sad for the love that had been tainted by this betrayal. But underneath all of that sadness was a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. Maybe this didn't have to be the end of our marriage. I don't know how to move forward, I admitted. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again, but part of me wants to try. Part of me still loves you, even though I hate what you did. But rebuilding trust, that's going to take time. And I'm not sure where we even start. He nodded, understanding the weight of what I was saying. I'll do anything, he said softly. I'll go to counseling. I'll give you all the transparency you need. Whatever it takes to show you that I'm committed to fixing this, I'll do it. So we decided to try. We started with counseling, both individually and together. In therapy, I was able to voice the pain and confusion I had been carrying for so long. It helped me to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that the betrayal never happened. It was about acknowledging the pain, working through it, and slowly learning how to trust again. For a while, I wasn't sure if counseling would help. The sessions were emotionally draining, and there were times when I left feeling more confused than when I walked in. But over time, I started to notice small changes. We were communicating better, and I began to see that my husband was genuinely remorseful. He wasn't just saying the right things, he was putting in the work to rebuild our relationship. There were still tough days, of course. Days when the memory of those messages would flood back, and I'd feel the old hurt creeping in. But there were also moments when I saw glimpses of the love we used to have, moments when I felt like we could make it through this. As for my brother-in-law, that was a different story. Forgiving my husband was hard enough, but forgiving him, that felt impossible. He had been someone I trusted, someone I considered family, and his betrayal felt even more personal. I avoided him for as long as I could, but eventually, I knew that we needed to have one final conversation. When we sat down, the tension between us was palpable. He looked ashamed, and I could tell that he was struggling with how to even begin the conversation. But this time, I was ready to speak my truth. You hurt me, I told him, my voice steady. You hurt me, and you hurt your brother. I trusted you, and you broke that trust in the worst way possible. He nodded, not even trying to defend himself. I know, he said quietly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how sorry I am. I never should have let things get as far as they did. I regret everything. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted, but I do know that I need to move forward. I can't keep carrying this anger with me, because it's only hurting me in the end. So while I can't say that I forgive you, I'm letting go of the anger. I'm choosing to move on, even if it's without you in my life. He looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, he said softly, and I'm so sorry. That conversation marked the end of my relationship with my brother-in-law. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I didn't know if I ever would be. But I also knew that I couldn't keep holding on to the anger, because it was only hurting me in the end. Letting go didn't mean forgetting, but it did mean choosing to prioritize my own healing. In the months that followed my husband, and I continued working on our relationship, it wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and fear. But slowly, we began to rebuild. It wasn't about going back to the way things were before the betrayal. It was about creating something new, a relationship built on honesty, transparency, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly love and trust each other. Looking back on everything, I've come to realize that this experience taught me so much about myself, about love, and about forgiveness. Betrayal has a way of breaking you down, of making you question everything you thought you knew. But it also has the potential to build you back up, stronger and wiser than before. I learned that forgiveness doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward, even when it's hard. It means acknowledging the pain, but also making space for healing. And most importantly, it means learning to trust yourself again, to trust your own strength, your own resilience, and your own capacity to love. All right, everyone, that's my story. Betrayal is one of the hardest things anyone can go through, especially when it comes from someone you love and trust. But if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that healing is possible, even when it feels impossible at first. It takes time, it takes work, and it takes a lot of soul searching, but it can happen. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone close to you? How did you handle it? Did you find a way to move forward, or are you still working through it? I know these kinds of stories aren't easy to share, but sometimes talking about it is the first step toward healing. So if you feel comfortable, drop your story in the comments. Let's support each other through the tough times. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any future uploads. Thanks for watching, and remember, trust is fragile, but with time and effort, it can be rebuilt.